to King Charles making an extremely rare speech in the Canadian Parliament. This is only the third time a British monarch has opened Canada's Parliament. The two other times were in 1957 and 1977 by Queen Elizabeth II, King Charles's mother. Of course, the first part of his speech was talking about Canada and how the country has embraced its British, French, and Indigenous roots. He went on to say that Canada is right now facing another critical moment in its history and how fundamental change is always unsettling. The second half of King Charles's speech was dedicated to a domestic audience, basically outlining how Mark Carney's government intends on fixing Canada's economy and the financial crisis that has gripped the country. France 24's Foreign Affairs editor Douglas Herbert was listening to the King's speech with me, and we can bring him in now. What did you make of the first part of this speech, which had some not so subtle messages?
No, yeah, exactly.
For the neighbor to the south.
No, I think you really cut to the chase here, Delano. This was, we were talking about going into this speech, the King not being political, being above the political fray, having a speech written for him, not writing the speech himself, not being able to express his own opinions here. He is playing a ceremonial role as the sovereign, the head of state here, of Canada in this case. And yet, the coded signals that we were talking about were, as you suggest, not so coded. Quite an explicit, if you will, ode to Canada. He began the speech, which, he said this is his 20th visit. All the previous visits obviously were in his previous life incarnation as the Prince of Wales. And he says, each time I come to Canada, a little more of Canada seeps into my bloodstream and straight to my heart. And then he went on, as you said, to sort of, we were talking before about how his very presence there was meant to send a signal that Canada was very much distinct from the United States, a very different type of place, both right now in the values it seems to be embracing, but in the values of the people, the Canadians themselves. And it seems that the early parts of this speech spoke to that sense of what makes Canada distinct and different at a time when the world is facing a giant stress test. He spoke of another critical moment, and what he meant by another critical moment is he referenced back, and I found this quite poignant. He referenced back, you talked about at the very beginning, how the very first time the head of state, a sovereign, a monarch, addressed the opening Canadian Parliament, the first and only time at the time, was Queen Elizabeth in 1957, and he said at the time Canada was, the world was still fresh and painful memories of World War II. It was in a period where the Cold War was intensifying, ramping up, and that the world in general, across the world, the values, the fundamental values of freedom and democracy were in jeopardy, were under threat. And then he sort of fast forwards, right? He said, yes, there have been epic-making events since then by way of the Vietnam War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the war on terrorism. And he then defined this, he framed this moment in time, the here and now, the today, as another one of these epic-making events, a critical moment, as you said it, in which Canada is facing challenges on all fronts and basically almost ticking off the list of a lot of the things right now that in their giant southern neighbor in America, a lot of people are talking about daily as the things that they fear are under threat. Democracy, pluralism, the rule of law, self-determination, freedom, right? You say, a bunch of abstract concepts, throwaway words. Not really. He says now more than ever, the challenge Canadians are facing, these are the values that the Canadian government is determined, as he put it, to protect. He doesn't say explicitly at a time where those values are under threat in your southern neighbor, and there's a sledgehammer being taken to the pillars of democracy and freedom in the U.S. He obviously didn't say that. We Canadians should still uphold them. But it was more than just a little implicit in his remarks that Canada has almost a value added in this world, right? Canada, a nation that really emerged as a modern day power in the wake of that war, around the time when his late mother, Queen Elizabeth, was speaking in 57, and emerging basically as a force for prosperity and values that Canada perhaps at one time shared in a hard sense with the
United
U.S., but
States.
now he sees a disassociation, even on trade issues, right? Global trade systems changing. He sees Canada now being as really a pillar of defense in a world that is undergoing frenetic, very fast-paced, chaotic, and dizzying change, and that it could be a pillar of both stability, but also a pillar of confidence and trust and resilience.
We should remind our viewers that this speech which King Charles made was actually on behalf of Canada's Prime Minister